The woman in the gray coat. The rain had been falling since morning, soft at first, then heavy and sharp like needles. Outside the courthouse, people moved quickly, heads down, umbrellas shaking under the wind. But one woman stood still. She wore a worn gray coat, 3 buttons missing. Her shoes had small holes. In one hand, she clutched a thin red folder. In the other, she held nothing, because her hand was shaking too much to hold anything at all. Her name was Ella Grayson. She was 32 years old, a single mother of 2, and a housekeeper in a small motel just outside Los Angeles. Today, she wasn't at work. Today, she had to defend herself in front of a judge who didn't even know her name 3 days ago. She had been accused of theft, of stealing $3,000 from the hotel's cash safe. The manager, a man with smooth hair and a crooked smile, had filed the report, said he saw her on camera, said she had motive, said the money was gone after her shift. Ella had cried when the officers came to her apartment. Her children, Mia and Daniel, were there. Mia had hidden behind the couch while Daniel, only 5, had asked if the police were there to give his mom a reward for being good at cleaning. They had taken her that night, released her next morning. No one cared she had no lawyer. No one cared the security camera footage was grainy, unclear, and cut off mid-frame. No one cared she had worked there for 6 years without ever being late, stealing, or even asking for a raise until a stranger walked into that courthouse. Keanu Reeves had come to court that day for a completely different reason. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a black hoodie, dark jeans, and had come to support a friend in a legal battle involving a property dispute. He had been sitting quietly in the back row of the courtroom, unnoticed, unheard, just like Ella. He saw her as she stepped forward. Her voice cracked when she said her name. Her eyes flicked to the judge, Judge Dalton, an older man with white hair and glasses that slid down his nose. He didn't look up from his papers. "Miss Grayson, you have no legal representation?" he asked without emotion. Ella shook her head. "I can't afford one, Your Honor." The courtroom laughed quietly. Not everyone, but enough to make the air colder. The prosecutor, a woman named Claire West, stood and smiled like a person who'd already won. She pulled out a printed sheet. "We have security footage. Miss Grayson was the last employee seen near the safe. The funds were discovered missing 30 minutes after she left her shift." Ella opened her red folder. Inside, she had her time card, her schedule, and a note from another employee who had borrowed her locker key that day. She tried to hand it to the judge. "I have a note. I wasn't near the—" "Do not interrupt, Miss Grayson," the judge snapped, waving her off. Keanu leaned forward. Something in him shifted. It was the way her voice broke, the way no one listened, the way her whole body looked like it was shrinking with every word thrown at her. He didn't know her, but he had seen enough injustice in the world to recognize when someone was being crushed by it. Ella stood frozen as the judge said he would review the materials but proceed with formal charges pending review. He gave her 2 days to prepare for trial. 2 days, with no lawyer, no money, and no one by her side. Keanu waited until the room emptied. He approached her slowly, gently, like one does with a bird on the edge of flying away. "Hi," he said, softly. "My name is Keanu." Ella looked up. She blinked once, then again. "Keanu, like the actor?" He smiled. "Yeah, it's me." "Why are you talking to me?" "Because no one else is," he said. "And you look like you could use some help." At first, she didn't believe he was serious. She thanked him politely and tried to leave, but Keanu followed her outside under the gray sky and said something that made her pause. "I believe you," he said, "and I know what it's like when people don't." Ella stood still. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her lips trembled. Then she handed him the red folder. She didn't say a word. Keanu took it. Keanu didn't sleep much that night. He sat on the floor of his living room, the folder open in front of him. He read every page, the time cards, the handwritten note, her work schedule. He found the name of the other housekeeper, Lynn, and tracked her down through social media. She worked 2 jobs, had 3 kids, and lived in a trailer park on the edge of town. He visited her the next morning. Lynn was suspicious at first, but when he showed her the red folder and said, "Ella's in trouble," the walls came down. She told him everything. How Ella had given her the locker key. How the manager, Mr. Bishop, had always made weird comments to Ella. How he once asked her to fix the schedule logs when payroll messed up. Keanu asked for her help in court. She agreed. The next day, Keanu called a friend. His name was Ray, a retired lawyer who had worked in justice reform for 20 years. Together they sat with Ella and walked her through what was going to happen. Ray offered to defend her pro bono. Ella cried then. Silent tears that rolled down her cheeks. Her kid sat on the couch beside her, coloring quietly. That night, Keanu went home and sat in his car for almost an hour. He looked up at the sky and remembered his sister. Remembered the years he had spent watching her go through pain no one deserved. Remembered how sometimes the world punished people not for doing wrong, but for simply being too quiet to fight back. He promised himself he wouldn't let that happen to Ella. Court resumed on a Thursday. Ella stood next to Ray. Her hands still shook, but she held her head higher now. Keanu sat behind them, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the judge. Ray spoke with power but calm. He presented the red folder. The note. Lynn testified that Ella wasn't near the safe, that she had been cleaning the East Wing during the exact window of time the money went missing. The prosecutor tried to poke holes. She asked why the note was handwritten, asked if Lynn was covering for a friend. Then Keanu stood up. The courtroom shifted. The judge looked confused. The prosecutor frowned. "Mr. Reeves, are you here to testify?" "No," he said. "But I am here to speak." "You're not an attorney," the judge said coldly. "No, but I am a citizen, and I've watched enough of this to say something." He stepped forward. The room went quiet. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice. But what he said silenced the room. He spoke about character, about dignity, about how systems crush those without means, how evidence is twisted, how power protects power, and how people like Ella, hardworking, humble, honest, are easy to blame because they don't have loud voices or expensive lawyers. He spoke with his heart. Every word cut through the courtroom like a slow wave. When he was done, even the judge looked away. Ella turned toward Keanu, and for the first time in days, she smiled. The hearing wasn't over. Not yet. But the tides had begun to shift, and the courtroom had seen something they couldn't unsee. A famous man standing for a forgotten woman. And it was only the beginning. The cracks in the marble floor the morning of the second hearing began with a strange silence across the courthouse steps. The usual chatter of lawyers, defendants, and clerks was replaced with whispers, most of them about what happened 2 days ago. Word had spread fast. Keanu Reeves had spoken up. Not in a movie, not on a stage, but in a courtroom, for a woman. Nobody noticed until she was accused of stealing money she never touched. Inside courtroom 4B, the energy was different. The judge came in slower than usual. He didn't make eye contact with Keanu, who was already seated in the back. But his jaw was tight and his hands trembled just slightly as he adjusted his glasses. Something had changed, but no one knew yet just how deep the cracks ran beneath the surface. Ella stood beside Ray again. Her coat was freshly washed, her shoes scrubbed clean, but her nerves still showed in the way she kept wringing her fingers. Ray leaned in and whispered, "This time, we do the talking. You just breathe." The prosecution opened with something no one expected. Claire West introduced a new witness, a man named Vincent Harmon, a regional finance auditor for the hotel chain. He had flown in overnight. His job, Claire explained, was to testify that the financial logs had a clear discrepancy, and the only person with full access to both locker room keys and cleaning rosters was Ella. Vincent took the stand, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a press conference. He looked smug, confident, and too polished. Ray leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Harmon, he said during cross-examination. "You've reviewed the logs, yes?" "Yes." "And you're saying Miss Grayson had the only access to the locker and staff closet?" "Correct." "And these logs," Ray said, holding up the sheets, "were printed directly from the hotel database?" "Yes. They're time-stamped." "Did you personally oversee the entries during the week of the theft?" "No, but I reviewed them." "So you can't confirm they weren't edited?" Vincent hesitated. Well, no. But why would they be?" "That," Ray said, turning slowly toward the judge, "is the question." He paused. Then he nodded at the door. A new person entered the room. Everyone turned. She was in her 60s, wore round glasses and a maroon cardigan. She introduced herself as Mrs. Ellen Rowe, recently retired head of hotel HR. She had been contacted by Ray just the night before, after he dug through old employee records and noticed something odd. Her name had disappeared from the hotel's recent reports, despite serving there for 17 years. Mrs. Rowe came to testify willingly, and what she said shook the room. She revealed that the hotel's internal systems could be edited manually, but only by management, not cleaners, not desk staff, not even HR. She revealed she had once raised concerns about false entries in the cleaning logs, only to be forced into early retirement. And finally, she said one more thing. Mr. Bishop, the manager, had full admin rights. He could adjust schedules, override keycard access, and delete surveillance backups. I warned the regional office. No one listened. The courtroom fell quiet. Claire West, the prosecutor, sat still, lips pressed together. The judge tapped his pen against the desk. But Ray wasn't done. He brought in one more piece of evidence, a flash drive. Keanu had stayed up late the night before, working with an old friend who was a tech specialist. Together, they had recovered deleted files from a cloud server tied to the hotel. What they found wasn't full footage, but partial video frames, enough to show that the time-stamped clip used to accuse Ella had been doctored. The real footage showed something else entirely. A man, rough build, long sleeves, face mostly turned, walking into the admin office during Ella's shift. The time code showed it happened 15 minutes before the safe alarm went off. The man left quickly, glancing up at the camera. The footage froze at that frame. Ray paused the video on that face. "Your Honor," he said softly, "this was not Miss Grayson. And as you can see, the figure here matches hotel manager Bishop. Same body type, same watch, same walk. We also have staff testimony confirming he was the only one in that section of the building that afternoon." A murmur spread through the room. Keanu from the back didn't move. His face was still, but his eyes burned with quiet fire. The judge leaned back. He asked for a recess. Claire West followed him out. Her voice was low, but her body language betrayed panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Ella sat down slowly. "What does it mean?" she asked Keanu. He knelt beside her, resting a hand gently on her arm. "It means the truth's coming up through the cracks." Outside the courthouse, a few reporters waited now, not many, but enough to make Ella nervous. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because sometimes," Keanu said, "the people who try to stay invisible end up shining the brightest when others try to bury them." He smiled gently. "You didn't ask for this, but you're handling it better than most would." Ella's throat tightened. She wanted to say thank you, but the words caught somewhere deep inside. So she just nodded, clutching the folder she had once believed was all she had to defend herself. Now it was evidence of something greater, her truth. But not everyone was ready to let her walk free. Behind closed doors, Judge Dalton sat in his chambers, pacing slowly. He had known Bishop for years. Golf games, mutual friends, donations. And though he hadn't yet admitted it, part of the reason he had been so cold to Ella was because he had believed Bishop without question. Now, doubt crept in. But pride was harder to let go of. And that pride would lead to one more twist before the trial ended. One more turn no one saw coming, and it would test everything Keanu had fought to protect. Silence is not always justice. The hallway outside courtroom 4B felt heavier that day. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy. Like the air was holding its breath. Even the guards at the entrance stood a little straighter. Something was off, but no one could say what exactly. Keanu noticed it the moment he stepped inside. It wasn't the look in Claire West's eyes. She had always looked cold. It wasn't the nervous glances from Bishop, the hotel manager, now officially under suspicion. It was the judge. Judge Dalton didn't just seem tired. He seemed cornered. He shuffled into the courtroom 20 minutes late, mumbled a quick apology, and avoided looking at anyone directly, especially Keanu. Ella sat quietly beside Ray, her hands folded, her shoulders stiff. She had slept only 4 hours the night before, replaying the flash drive footage in her head again and again, hoping it was enough. Her children were with a neighbor who'd offered to babysit. For the first time in weeks, Ella hadn't packed their school lunches. She hadn't brushed their hair. All she could think about now was the verdict. Would the system see her, or would it erase her like it had tried to do so many others? Ray stood and prepared to call his final witness. But before he could speak, the judge interrupted. "Mr. Thomas," he said firmly, "I've reviewed the footage. It is inconclusive, the face is not clear, and the connection to Manager Bishop is circumstantial at best." Ray blinked slowly. "Your Honor, you saw the watch, the testimony, the altered logs." "Enough," the judge said, a little too quickly. "Unless you have something more concrete, this court will proceed based on facts, not assumptions, or emotion." Keanu frowned. He leaned forward, his hands pressed tightly together. Ray didn't back down. "Then let's bring in the facts. We subpoenaed the hotel's internal audit files. They arrived this morning." He handed over a folder, thicker than any before. Inside were 3 years' worth of questionable log edits, all traced back to one username, bishop.admin1. Multiple shifts moved. Keycard entries erased, even entries during Bishop's own vacations, showing access from his account. Claire West stood abruptly. "Objection! This is outside the timeline of the current case." Ray didn't flinch. "Your Honor, this shows a pattern. A long-term abuse of admin powers that directly connects to the events on the day Miss Grayson was accused." The judge looked down at the folder. His hands shook slightly as he turned the pages. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft buzz of a flickering light overhead. Keanu stared at the judge. Not angrily, not even impatiently, just watching. Like someone waiting to see if the man would do the right thing, even when no one else would. The judge cleared his throat. "I'll take a recess to review this." But as he stood, he dropped a paper. It floated slowly to the ground like the truth refusing to be buried. Outside, the air had shifted again. Colder now. Clouds thickened over the courthouse dome. Keanu and Ray stood by a bench while Ella sat close to a tree, her fingers digging nervously into the dirt near its roots. "Why is he hesitating?" she asked softly. Ray sighed. "Because the judge has history with Bishop. They served on the same business board 7 years ago. Technically legal, but messy." Ella's eyes widened. "So, he might not be fair?" Keanu stepped in. "Judges are human. They're supposed to rise above pressure, but sometimes they don't." She looked up at him. "What if it's too late for me?" "It's not," he said gently. "The truth's out now. Even if they try to bury it, it won't. Stay down." 20 minutes later, they were called back. But something happened in that small window that none of them saw coming. The judge had made a call to a friend in the district office. He requested that the case be moved from open hearing to a private bench review. He claimed it was to protect the dignity of the accused. But that wasn't the truth. He was trying to close the doors. Keanu Reeves didn't take that lightly. When the courtroom clerk announced the session would be restricted, Keanu stood up and asked to speak. "I want to request public continuation of this trial," he said calmly. The clerk hesitated. "Mr. Reeves, you're not an attorney. I'm a citizen, and I'm part of this hearing by witness submission and statement." The Constitution protects public trials. Unless there's a safety threat, this isn't legal. Ray added, Your Honor, I also object. This change undermines transparency. The judge looked cornered again. He paused, lips pressed tightly, then finally muttered, Objection noted. Trial will remain open. The air cracked. For the first time, everyone saw it. He was sweating. Ray called his final surprise witness, a hotel janitor named Caleb who had been working the night of the missing footage. Caleb had been fired 2 days after the theft for performance issues, but Ray found him living in a shared apartment in another town. Caleb told the court he had seen Bishop in the admin room that day. He remembered because Bishop had yelled at him to leave immediately and threatened to dock his pay. He looked nervous, Caleb said, kept looking over his shoulder. I thought maybe he was sick, but he didn't want anyone near that hallway. Did you tell anyone? Ray asked. I tried, Caleb said. But then I lost my job. Keanu closed his eyes. This was the final stone. Ray turned to the judge. Your Honor, this is not just a case of a missing $3,000. This is a pattern, a network of cover-ups, lies, and fear. Miss Grayson's name is being dragged through the mud to protect a man who thought no one would ever question him. The room was silent again. Then the judge stood. He didn't say anything for a full minute. His fingers tapped the bench. I will review the full testimony and documents. Final ruling tomorrow. He didn't look at Ella. He didn't look at Keanu. He just left. Outside the courtroom, cameras had started to arrive. Not many, but a few. The story had begun to leak. Headlines like Keanu Reeves speaks in court to defend hotel worker had begun circulating. Ella saw her name on a phone screen for the first time. She didn't know whether to feel afraid or hopeful. Keanu walked beside her, calm and steady. You did everything right, he told her. But he still gets the last word, she whispered. Not always, Keanu replied. Sometimes the people, watching, they speak louder than the ones on the bench. That night, something unexpected happened. A junior clerk from the courthouse sent an anonymous email. Inside was a scanned document. Bank record. It showed that Judge Dalton had received a consulting donation from a corporate account belonging to the hotel chain, dated 6 days after Bishop's internal logs began to shift against Ella. The file was real. Ray, Keanu, and a few trusted contacts worked all night to verify it. The next morning, everything would change, and the courtroom wouldn't be ready for what was about to be exposed. The day the court held its breath, the sun didn't rise that morning. It broke through the sky like something trying to be heard after a long silence. Golden light fell over the steps of the courthouse, touching every stone and window pane. Reporters stood outside now more than before. Not just locals. A few from out of town. Even a small satellite van with a red logo was parked near the curb. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just the case. It was the air around it. People could feel it, like a storm was about to strike. But instead of thunder, it would come with truth. Inside courtroom 4B, every seat was taken. Strangers who had nothing to do with Ella's life sat watching as if they were part of it now. And in a way, they were. She had gone from invisible to unforgettable in less than a week. Not because she wanted attention, but because she refused to disappear when power tried to erase her. Keanu Reeves entered quietly, dressed in the same black hoodie. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just walked straight to the seat behind the defense table and gave Ella a small nod. A silent way of saying, "You're not alone." Ray Thomas stood beside her, clutching a printed packet of documents. He had barely slept. The file in his hand was a weapon now, but not the kind that hurt, the kind that set people free. Judge Dalton entered 10 minutes late. Again, but this time, he looked like a man carrying a secret too heavy for his spine. He sat slowly, cleared his throat, and opened the session. "We are here for final remarks," he began. "Before I deliver my ruling on the matter of State versus Ella Grayson," he glanced at Ray. "Defense may proceed." Ray didn't waste time. He walked to the center of the courtroom with the slow, careful steps of a man who understood how heavy truth can be. "Your Honor," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was going to deliver a closing statement about fairness, about systems, and about how the people we least expect can become targets in a game they never chose to play. But this morning something came to my desk that changed everything." He lifted the file. "We received a document, and we verified it. 3 sources confirmed its legitimacy, including a former Treasury investigator who served under the State Ethics Board." He handed a copy to the judge, another to the clerk, and then projected the image on the courtroom screen. "This," he said slowly, "is a record of a consulting fee paid from a corporate account linked to the hotel's executive fund into an account tied to Judge Dalton. The amount, $25,000. The timing, 6 days after Bishop began altering employee logs targeting Miss Grayson. The note in the wire reads, 'For advisory role, discreet guidance.'" The courtroom gasped. Judge Dalton didn't blink, but his jaw locked. Ray turned to the room. "This payment was never disclosed. It violates judicial ethics and financial transparency laws, and it raises one question above all others. Why would a hotel chain pay a judge quietly during an employee investigation?" He faced the judge again. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for truth. And if this court cannot give that, then the people sitting in this room, the ones outside watching, deserve to know that too." Keanu stood slowly. Everyone turned to him. He walked to the front, looked directly at the judge. "You once said," Keanu began, "that court is about facts, not emotion. But sometimes, Your Honor, the truth carries both. This woman," he said, pointing to Ella, "almost lost everything, her job, her children, her reputation. Not because she did something wrong, but because someone thought she wouldn't fight back. And they almost got away with it. Because someone powerful helped them stay hidden." His voice never rose, but it pierced the silence like glass. "Your job is to protect justice, not bury it in forms and fees. So today we all get to find out who you really are." The judge's hands trembled. For a long moment no one moved. Then, without saying a word, Judge Dalton stood. He looked down at the file. He looked at Ella. Then he looked at Keanu and said something no one expected. "I recuse myself from this case." Gasps echoed. Reporters rushed out of the room. He continued, "Effective immediately. All findings and evidence will be submitted to the Ethics Committee. I recommend the case be moved to a higher court." He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He simply stepped down. Outside, the courthouse erupted. News vans rolled forward. Microphones waved. People shouted questions. But inside, Ella sat frozen. She didn't cheer, didn't cry, just stared at her folded hands. Keanu leaned over. "You okay?" I don't know," she whispered. "I think so. But I'm still shaking." "That's normal," he said. "Even strong people shake." Later that afternoon, a new judge was assigned. Judge Maynard, a woman known for her fairness and clarity, reviewed the documents for 2 hours, then called everyone back in. "Based on the submitted evidence," she said, "the charges against Miss Grayson are dismissed with prejudice. She is free to go. Further investigations will be opened into the hotel's practices, the role of Manager Bishop, and any improper conduct connected to this case." Ella didn't move. For a second, it didn't register. Then she looked up at Keanu, her mouth opening, slightly. Did she say, "You're free," he said gently. Her eyes welled with tears, and this time, she didn't hide them. The walk outside felt like stepping into a different world. The crowd erupted. Flashes, questions, cheers. But Ella didn't speak to the cameras. She bent down and hugged her daughter and son, who had run into her arms as soon as they saw her, and for the first time in weeks she smiled fully, not because she had won a case, but because someone had finally listened. Later that night, in a quiet cafe tucked away behind a bookstore, Ella sat across from Keanu. No cameras, no crowd, just 2 people drinking tea. I still don't understand why you helped me, she said softly. Because someone once helped me, he said. When no one else did. She nodded slowly, then said something she had never said before, not to anyone. I thought I was worthless, she whispered. I thought maybe the world really didn't care. Keanu shook his head. You were never worthless. They just tried to make you feel that way. But look at you. You stood through all of it. And you're still here. She blinked away tears and whispered, Thank you. Keanu raised his cup. To truth, he said, and to the people who don't give up. The story didn't end there, but that chapter did. Ella got her job back, then left it on her own terms. She now helps train other housekeepers on knowing their rights. The hotel chain faced public backlash and legal audits. Judge Dalton was formally investigated and stepped down permanently. And Keanu, he quietly returned to his life. But sometimes, when no one's looking, he still visits that small cafe, just in case someone else needs help being heard. When the world finally listens, 3 weeks had passed since the courtroom doors opened and truth spilled out like light breaking through a cracked ceiling. Ella Grayson was no longer the woman in the gray coat who stood alone, clutching a red folder with shaking hands. She had become something else, still quiet, still kind, but no longer afraid to take up space. The motel she once cleaned tried to offer her the job back with a raise and an apology written by a lawyer. Ella declined without blinking. Instead, she took a short break to breathe, to be with her children, to feel sunlight without fear. But as the days passed, something else began to stir inside her, something she didn't expect. People started reaching out. Other workers from nearby hotels, janitors, night clerks, young women who said, "What happened to you almost happened to me." She hadn't planned it, but somehow Ella had become a voice for the unheard, and it all began again when she received a message from a local school teacher named Mrs. Beck. I have 5 students whose parents are cleaning staff, the message read. They ask about you, they say you're brave. Ella stared at the screen for a long time before replying, I'm not brave. I was just tired of being silent. Sometimes, the teacher wrote back, that's exactly what bravery is. The story of Keanu Reeves defending a motel cleaner had made headlines, but Ella never spoke to the press. She had been invited to interviews, offered magazine covers, podcast spots. She refused them all. She didn't want to become a symbol. She wanted to become a change. But when a small neighborhood community center invited her to speak to a room of 30 women, most of them maids, nannies, dishwashers, she said yes. She walked into that room wearing the same coat from the courtroom, patched now but clean. Her children sat in the back watching quietly as she took the microphone. I'm not here because I did something amazing, she began. I'm here because someone tried to crush me, and for the first time in my life, someone stood beside me and said no. Every word she said came not from a place of anger but from a place of deep understanding. She spoke of long shifts and sore backs, of being overlooked, of staying quiet because bills needed to be paid, and of what happens when someone finally tells you your truth matters. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another, until the small space filled with the sound of people who, maybe for the first time, saw themselves not as invisible, but as worthy. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed far from the spotlight. He hadn't wanted credit, hadn't made any public statements. He had simply helped and stepped back. But the world had noticed, and quiet whispers turned into real questions about the systems that let people like Bishop manipulate records, and the judges who let it slide. Investigations opened across several hotels in the region. One by one, employees stepped forward. Some had stories like Ella's, others had been silenced with threats. But now, the silence had cracked. Ella didn't just speak anymore. She helped. With Ray Thomas by her side, she started a small nonprofit called Folder Red, named after the file she had once carried alone. It offered legal resources to low-income workers who found themselves accused without defense. Donations poured in quietly. And one day she received a simple envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note. No one should ever have to walk into a courtroom alone. Your story made sure of that. K attached was a check, $10,000, signed anonymously, but Ella knew, and she cried when she saw it, not because of the money, but because someone still believed in her. Months passed. Her life began to feel steady again. But then one morning while walking her daughter Maya to school, a black car pulled up beside her. A man in a gray suit stepped out. He was from the state attorney's office. "Miss Grayson," he said, "we've arrested Bishop. He confessed to altering records and embezzling company funds. He also admitted to contacting Judge Dalton to help bury the case." Ella stopped walking. Her heart beat so loudly she could barely hear his words. "The investigation you helped start has turned into something much bigger, and we'd like you to testify." For a moment her throat closed. The courtroom again. The long benches. The pressure. But then she looked at her daughter, and something inside her steadied. "I'll do it," Ella said, "but not for revenge for the next woman they try to silence." Weeks later, Ella stood again in court, but this time not as the accused, as a witness. She spoke calmly, clearly. Her voice didn't shake. When asked how she felt during her original trial, she answered, "I felt erased. Like the truth didn't matter unless someone famous said it out loud." When asked why she chose to come back, she replied, "Because silence protects the wrong people." Her testimony helped convict Bishop. The courtroom heard her truth, not as a story of pity, but as a warning that systems must answer to the people they fail. After the trial, Ella stepped out into the sunlight. Reporters asked if she had anything to say. She smiled softly. "No speeches today," she said. "I'm going to pick up my kids." Keanu watched it all from afar. He never stepped into the spotlight again for that case. But one evening, as he walked past a street mural downtown, he noticed a painting. It showed a woman holding a red folder in one hand and lifting another. Woman off the ground with the other. There were no names, just a sentence painted below. "Kindness is louder when it stands beside justice." He stood there for a long while, then smiled to himself. Ella's life had changed, but more importantly, she had changed others, and the red folder that once felt like a shield. Now it had become a banner, the letter beneath the rain. The rain returned on a quiet Sunday morning, soft and steady like a lullaby written by the sky. It tapped gently on windows, brushed rooftops, and slid down the sidewalks like the world was being washed clean. Ella sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea in her hands, the steam curling upward like fragile ribbon. Her daughter Mia was at the couch reading a book. Daniel was drawing stick figures at the corner, his small hands smudged with crayon. There was peace now, not the kind that comes suddenly, but the kind built slowly, moment by moment after everything that once broke has been patiently stitched together. But even on peaceful mornings, the past sometimes sends a whisper. And today it arrived in the form of a letter, a plain envelope. No name on the front, just a single word on the back flap. Grace. Ella's heart skipped. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note in careful, steady script. She recognized it at once. Judge Dalton's. "Miss Grayson, I write this not to justify my actions, for they are not justifiable, but to admit something that has weighed on me since the day you stood before my bench. I saw you that day, but not clearly. I saw a number, a case file, a task, not a human being. I had convinced myself long ago that this was how justice worked. Cold, distant, procedural. You reminded me that justice must also be human. You spoke no hate. You carried no bitterness. You let truth do the speaking even when the world tried to silence you. I will not return to the bench. I will spend my remaining years trying to listen better, live humbler, and teach others where I failed. I hope someday, if not now, you can find space in your heart to forgive a man who did not see you in time. Dalton. Ella read the letter twice, then folded it slowly. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel triumph. She felt a kind of stillness. Later, that afternoon, as the rain slowed to a drizzle, Ella took her children for a walk. They passed the courthouse, now quiet, its steps washed clean by days of drizzle. Mia asked softly, "Mama, is that where they were mean to you?" Ella paused. "That's where they didn't understand me," she answered. "But now they do." They walked further, and near the old bookstore, a small chalkboard stood out front. Written on it were words in bright white, "To speak truth kindly and to hear it bravely. That is real justice." Ella smiled. As months passed, Folder Red grew into something much bigger than Ella ever imagined. It wasn't just legal help anymore. It was training, education, support. They taught people how to protect themselves, how to speak up, how to document, how to fight with dignity and courage. It became a movement whispered from city to city. She never let her name sit above the door, but people knew. And they came because they believed if someone like her could rise, maybe they could too. Keanu Reeves visited only once after everything settled. He didn't call first. He just showed up at the community center wearing the same black hoodie and a simple smile. Ella was in the middle of a session teaching a group of young workers about employment rights. When she looked up and saw him, she paused. "We're talking about standing up," she said to the group, "and I want you to meet someone who reminded me what that really means." The group turned. Some gasped quietly. Keanu raised his hand with a small wave and said just 3 words. She led first. Afterward, they sat in the break room. "You've done more than I ever expected," he said. "So have you," she replied. "You changed everything." He shook his head gently. "I didn't change the world. I just refused to walk away from it." Ella looked down at her hands. "I still get scared," she admitted. "Me too," he said. "But you don't have to stop being scared to start doing something brave." She nodded. Her voice softened. "Sometimes I think about the day you spoke in court, how your words made the silence move." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes all it takes is one voice to remind the others they have one too." As the sun dipped below the skyline that evening, Keanu stood at the door. "Keep going," he said. "They need you." "Come back and see us," she replied. "Even if it's just for tea." He looked over his shoulder. "You still make it with too much sugar?" "Maybe." He chuckled, then walked out into the fading light. Years from now, they would tell stories about a woman in a gray coat who stood in court with nothing but a red folder and her truth. They would say she taught the world that kindness wasn't weakness and silence wasn't safety. They would say justice wore many faces, but courage wore hers. Ella never sought fame. She sought fairness. And in doing so, she became something more powerful than any headline. She became hope.